Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And today, boy, are we lucky, lucky, lucky. We have Micheal Port from Heroic Public Speaking with us today. Gosh, I think I've known Micheal for, I don't know, 12, 13, maybe 14 years. I met him when I first went to a Book Yourself Salad thing. And I walked in and I said to Micheal after I went to the first thing, we need to be more advanced. And he let me try that, and it fell flat on his face. But we both learned a little bit, and it was really a lot of fun. And over the years, I consider Micheal a good friend, and I've had the honor of helping him with a few things along the way with his own business. And it's a real pleasure. And today we're going to talk about why you need to know about being a great public speaker. And by the way, I have to tell you this. First time I saw Micheal ever direct somebody on stage, my mouth dropped to my feet. I have never, ever, ever seen anybody as skilled as he was. So instead of me wandering on about Micheal, let's bring him on and listen to some of his wisdom. Hey, Micheal, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much. Very kind words. I appreciate that.
Well, they're true, and I have really never seen anybody direct a speaker like you, and I've done a fair amount of training in that over my lifetime, and you've been a big help with me and made me a lot better, so I appreciate that.
Oh, good.
So
Well,
let's
let me
go
make a
ahead.
distinction right away because something that you mentioned in the introduction I think is important to clarify. I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to do public speaking from the stage or virtually to large audiences. I don't think that's necessary for any one individual to do, and I certainly don't think it's necessary to build a business. But there's communication skills that certainly help us when we're trying to present to a large group, but they also help us when we're trying to present to one person or to try to get someone to feel different or think different or act different. And every single business owner, has lots of different challenges that they need to overcome, often on a daily basis. And those challenges are more easily overcome when we have better communication skills. So sometimes when people hear public speaking, they get nervous and they say, no, that's not for me. I don't do public speaking. I'm not interested in public speaking. That's for somebody else. But every single one of us is well served by improving our ability to communicate so that other people understand what we're trying to say, and more importantly, are positively affected by what we're trying to say so that we can get people to feel differently or think differently or act differently.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I remember back in my vending days when we would promote somebody to a supervisor status, one of the things they had to do among many was they had to join Toastmasters.
Hmm.
And it wasn't I wasn't having them join Toastmasters on how to give speeches. I needed to have them be able to speak to our customers in a way that didn't sound like they were idiots.
Yeah.
And, because the truth is, all our supervisors came from the blue collar world, which is where our listeners come from here. And they would go into, a meeting with our customers or with the people who were responsible for signing the contracts with us. And they needed to be able to speak to them in a way that was impactful. And that was one-on-one speaking. They never, never, never. In fact, they used to fight me like crazy. He goes, I don't want to get up in front and speak to people. I said, well, it's part of the deal. If you don't do it, you don't get the job.
So one of the things that's critically important to consider, even before we start to work on our skill development as public speakers or communicators, is the concept of safety. Because very often in the workplace, when you're trying to bring a new idea to the team, or you've got to share some news that may be provocative for a variety of reasons, it can be anxiety provoking for the people with whom you're communicating. And very often when we think about communicating, we think about information communication. And if we're focused first and primarily on on information communication, we often neglect to consider how people feel in the moment about the dynamic or the relationship that exists between the people communicating and also the information, how they feel about that information. And so, what I recommend is to consider safety first because,
So, what does that mean, Michael? I'm not quite clear
I
on that.
mean,
Can you?
I'll give you an example. So
Okay.
let's say you have a teenage daughter, and she's always been a good student, and she has a core group of friends that you feel are a positive influence on her. She's played a musical instrument and has been involved in other extracurricular activities. But then she starts dating this guy, and you're not crazy about this guy. You know, you don't like his haircut, you don't like the way he dresses, you don't like that he doesn't stand up when you walk in the room, he doesn't look you in the eye, and you think he drives a little too fast, and so you're worried about his influence on her because she's not playing her instrument as much as she was. She doesn't seem to be as focused on her schoolwork as she was, and she's not spending as much time with her core group of friends as she was. And so if you say to her, listen, the guy's a bum, he's a jerk, forget about him. I don't want you seeing him. You got to go do the things that you did before. End of discussion. How well do you think that's going to go?
I can tell you from personal experience, not well.
Exactly. It's not going to go very well because she feels unsafe. She feels that you're taking something away from her that she really wants. So maybe she feels like, she's got a lot of more excitement in her life now because of this guy. Maybe, he's popular in a way that she wasn't before, and she likes the access to a different social group. And so if you approach it without thinking about her safety first, you're likely going to exacerbate the situation and drive a bigger wedge in between you. And anytime a wedge is driven in between two communicators, communication usually degrades. And so, if you, instead of going in with that approach, if you think about, well, how can I make her feel safe in this conversation? Well, I probably need to think about what my objectives actually are. Yeah, sure, I'd love it if she just stopped seeing this guy, but maybe that's an unrealistic expectation right now, and maybe that'll actually make it worse. So, what if she still dates this guy, but she still stays engaged with her music, with her core group of friends, with her schoolwork, so she doesn't lose sight of the things that have brought value to her over many years. She's like, well, my objective is to try to get her to stay engaged with those things, make her feel safe that I'm not taking him away, so she stays engaged with me around that relationship and doesn't shut me out. So if you went into the conversation with a really clear focus on telling her what your intentions are and what your intentions are not, you might create a sense of safety. You might say, listen, my intentions are not to break you up with this guy or take anything away. I want you to have lots of excitement in your life and fun and access to, these new social experiences. I think, that could be really meaningful for you. My intention is just to make sure that you are still engaged with the things that have brought you so much joy and meaning over the years, because I know it's really good for your development, and you've loved them. She might say, "Oh, okay, I'll have this conversation. That I feel safe now to have the conversation." And as a result, you may have a much more communicative, connected conversation where you can positively influence how she thinks and then what she does, because you focused first on how she feels. Generally we go right to the, okay, I want to change what people do, or I want to change what they think. But if we don't first focus on changing how they feel, it's very hard to change what they think or what they do. And that's why we look at safety first from a communications perspective, whether it's just one-on-one with a family member or an employee or a partner in the business, and when we're doing work from the stage or in front of a video camera to large groups of people.
So that's a great point. I mean, it's if in any sales training you ever go through, people say, they buy an emotion and justify it with facts. I mean, that's like the basis of all sales training. And it's probably the basis of all communication. If we don't work on feelings first and get people to feel something, there's no way in the world they're ever going to listen to what we want them to listen to.
Correct.
That's a
And,
really good point.
and if you're asking someone to change the way they see the world, by the way, I don't know if you can hear that. There's some pounding on the roof of our headquarters here. We have vultures who live up above on our roof. Like we have about 30 of them, no exaggeration. And I mentioned this just in case you can hear. That's what the pounding is up there.
I can't hear it, so
Okay.
that's fine.
But I mentioned it also because at first I was a little concerned with all these vultures around. I thought, well, is that a bad omen? But then I discovered that there's some mythology around the vulture that's actually really relevant for the work that we do. So the vulture represents death of the ego in certain cultural mythology, and I think that's a really interesting thing to consider, because a lot of us are very influenced by our ego, our need for approval, our need for status, and our need for approval and our need for status generally interferes with our ability to communicate. Because if we have a need for approval, then we're often pandering to other people or taking approaches that are just going to make people happy, but are not actually going to produce results. Or if we have a need for status, we may come into a conversation like a bully or like a bulldozer, and not be as empathetic and considerate of other people's feelings in the process. So when we have clients here at HBS HQ, when they either hear or see the vultures, we're able to share this mythology with them and give them an opportunity as students to recognize that their ego may often be the thing that stands in the way of them becoming better communicators or producing more results over approval.
So, Michael, in the first 13 minutes of this podcast, you've done something really interesting. And I want to pivot over this for a second because I think it's a big deal. And the reason I think it's a big deal is I'm getting inundated with my inbox with this issue, which is storytelling. You just told 2 stories. How important are stories in communication, in your opinion?
I think they're very important if they're used well. I think the risk is that we think storytelling is so incredibly important that we focus on the story more than the lesson of the story. Because the stories are tools that we use to help teach a lesson. Because if you can use a story that someone can relate to, they can often see themselves in that story. And as a result, they can connect with what you're sharing. But sometimes we see people going overboard with stories such that when, either halfway through, people are kind of looking at their watches going, where are you going with this? Right. It feels a little bit like a dad story, which my kids have told me that I do. Even though I'm a professional storyteller, for the most part, I still sometimes, as a dad, will go on just a little too long with the kids. So we've always got to make sure that we're editing, sculpting, molding our stories to an end goal. Why are we telling the story? What is the point of the story? And when you think about storytelling, it's important to recognize that just because something happened to you or you're familiar with a particular story doesn't mean that you're actually ready to tell it in service of of a communication objective. So a lot of times people will think, well, I've got a great story, so I'm just going to use this story the next time I'm trying to, communicate a point. But they haven't actually worked on the story. They haven't sculpted it, molded it to the objective's end. And as a result, it's usually filled with way too much exposition so that it goes on too long and nothing really happens. Sort of feels like a French film. You're thinking something's going to happen. I'm sure at some point. I'm just going to wait 10 more minutes. Okay, 10 minutes have passed. Nothing's happened. I'll wait 10 more minutes. So Aristotle gave us a really great structure that we can use. Anybody can use this anytime they are thinking about using a story to help illustrate an important point. And the structure is called the 3-act structure. And the 3-act structure is present in most of the TV shows that you watch, most of the films that you see, most of the plays that you go to or used to go to before the pandemic. And it is inherent in most stories that you tell. And the 3-act structure is really straightforward. And when you're thinking about telling a story, all you have to do is try to identify which parts of the story fall into which act. So Act 1 is the exposition. It's the given circumstances. It's the time, the setting, the place. It's what the audience needs to know, or the listener needs to know, in order to understand the following action. Act 2 is the conflict. And Act 2 starts with an inciting incident. Something happens that creates conflict. Now, that conflict creates action. That action creates more conflict. That conflict creates more action. That action creates more conflict. And so the story can build through Act 2, leading to Act 3, which is the resolution. And the resolution can be very short when you're telling a story, and the exposition can be very short. You want to spend most of your time in Act 2 when you're telling a story. Because if you don't have an Act 2 that is robust, filled with lots of conflict and action, it often feels pedestrian. And a story that feels pedestrian often feels boring. And in Act 1, if you have too much exposition, it can be either confusing to people or, again, boring. And as communicators and public speakers, the thing that we have to be most careful of is being boring. It's the death of any speech. Boring. Great information, but boring as hell. That's a little bit like what it feels like to go to a typical college lecture. On the other hand, if you're an incredible entertainer, but there's not much meat in the material, they go, oh, that was really fun. I mean, I didn't really get anything from it. I don't really remember what was happening, but I had a good time. So we don't want to be on either ends of those spectrums. We want to be somewhere in the middle where we're using entertaining performance elements. We're really bringing theatricality to our stories, but they're filled with robust, rich content that is immediately relevant, applicable, timely, and helpful for the people that we serve.
That's really great. That's great information. I want to get your opinion. We have time for one more thing. I just want to get your opinion on this because I think there's something else along with that, which I see people make mistakes all the time. And one of the things I've been doing recently on LinkedIn, when I connect with somebody, I ask them to send me their best website. And I do this out of curiosity to see who they're talking to. And I'm a big, I just finished my second book, which you were kind enough to write a blurb for. And what I've learned in that process of writing these two books, which are both parables, is that you have a guide and you have a hero. And you never want to make yourself the hero. You really want to make yourself the guide, because you want to make your customer or your visitor or your friend or the person you're telling the story to the hero. Correct. And I see people get this backwards all the time, where they continually make themselves the hero and the person you're talking with gets left out. Does that make sense to you?
Of course it does. It's one of the reasons that that you see this very often in self-help, business help books, self-help, business help speeches, is in part because monkey see, monkey do. When most people start to consider giving speeches or writing books, uh, they start from a place that is influenced by what they see other people do. And in the self and the business help industry, there's a lot of ego-driven projects.
Yes.
So very often, people are creating speeches, writing books, putting out content that is in large part designed to lift themselves up. They're designed to get approval for the creator. And so when we want to, go down the path of becoming a content creator of some kind, we're very influenced by what we've seen. So we think, oh, that must be the way that it's done. And so that's nobody's fault. That's just a consequence of the aggregate of a lot of work that is produced from that perspective. And when I look at my early work, I started writing books in 2005. There was more of that in my early work than in my later work, because over time, two things happen. One, you start to realize what people actually respond to. And number two, you become often more secure in your work. And as a result, you have less need for approval. So you're not writing or creating or speaking from a place of trying to get that approval. And so, generally there are two different types of business and personal self-help books and speeches. There are how-to type books and speeches, and then there are how to think type books and speeches. And they're both very valuable. They serve different purposes. But when you're working on developing content, you want to think about which you're focusing on. Are you doing really like how-to advice, nitty-gritty, nuts and bolt type stuff, which is expert-driven material? Here, I'm an expert. Let me show you the best practices on how to do something. Versus how to think type books and speeches and other content, which is visionary in nature, that often challenges the status quo, provides an alternative approach and a new way of thinking, leading to a new way of being, so that you can create new worlds. And it's a different approach. But in both of those approaches, we want to make sure that the person who is consuming that content is actually the hero, and we are the guide, whether we're doing expert-driven how-to advice work or visionary, change the world change the world view, change the perspective, challenge the status quo, deliver new approaches to current best practices. Either way, the person who is consuming it should be the hero.
Absolutely. Michael, we could go on probably for another hour or two, but unfortunately, we are out of time.
Hour or two, we could do 12 to 15 hours. Let's go. We'll end
Okay.
the podcast, but we'll just keep going.
Well, since it's a commute drive podcast, we kind of need to end it here. I would like to have you back again, and I'm sure we will, because you are such a great guest, and you're so generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So you have a great program. I've been through it. I've not been through your master program. I've been through all your other programs, including how to write a book. You were enormously helpful with that. How do people find you?
Sure. HeroicPublicSpeaking.com. HeroicPublicSpeaking.com is the best place to go. We have some free resources there. For example, there's a new primer on how to do virtual presentations, because of course there are not a lot of in-person presentations these days, and a whole other host of free resources you can pick up there. I also do a podcast called Steal the Show with Micheal Port, and you can get that anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can pick up a copy of the book Steal the Show, which is not a bad book, actually. It's a Wall Street
That's a
Journal
great book.
So
It's a great
feel
book. I liked it.
Yeah.
I liked it.
When
And I
you've
read a
written-
lot of
You've
books.
written 8 books. Some books are better than others, just to be clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true with all of them. I'm going to assume your later books are better than your earlier books.
I don't know. I think my earlier and my later are better. A couple in the middle weren't as popular. But the 2 most popular books that I've written are Book Yourself Solid, which was my first book, and Steal the Show, which was my most recent book.
Yes. And by the way, if you get the Book Yourself Solid, which I highly recommend, I think it's the best marketing book ever written, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much.
And the version you want is the illustrated version, so you can do all the exercises.
Yeah.
The written one is great, but the illustrated one really takes you through. At the end of that, you're going to have a really good marketing plan.
Yeah, I did an illustrated version of that book, especially for people who don't love to slog through lots of text.
Yes.
So I was able to cut about 50% of the text and replace it with illustrations so you can see the concept quite quickly. Of course, I had a professional illustrator do the illustrations, or else it wouldn't have gone very well if I had tried to do it. But I think that book is really effective for people who want to use it as a process for improving their marketing and don't want to have to read through the whole thing. They can see it and get it.
Yeah, it's a great book. Either version is great, but I happen to like the illustrated one. I use it as a teaching tool with our clients. So I also have an offer for you. I'm going to show it there. I have a free ebook. I have a strong belief that all companies that are blue collar, that have over 25 employees, need to be sale ready at all times. Now, sale ready does not mean you're going to sell your company. It just means you've built an organization that somebody else would want to own. And when you do this, you're going to have more fun and make more money. I've written a free ebook about this, which I would highly recommend you get. You get this at www.sustainablebusiness.co. That's .co, not .com. /sale ready. And then you'll get a free copy of the ebook. You're going to find 8 things you need to do to create a sale ready company. Also, please, please, please go to wherever you listen to this podcast and give us an honest rating and review. It's really, really important. So thanks a lot for stopping by today. This is Josh Patrick. We're with Micheal Port. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. I hope to see you back here really soon.